All right, man, peace. So the great running back of the Dallas Cowboys, Ezekiel Elliot, has had his 6-game suspension for domestic violence upheld in the U.S. Judicial Appellate Court. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Here we go. If you're just joining us, the latest on Ezekiel Elliot, the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Court has denied the emergency injunction request for Elliot. Translation: his 6-game suspension for a violation of the league's personal conduct policy related to domestic violence is back on. The appeals court will hear Elliott's appeal on an expedited basis on December 1st. Pending some unforeseen legal twist, Elliot will not be able to play in the Cowboys' next 4 games.
Now, she said, unless there's some unforeseen legal twist, this is going to give us a chance in the next 2 weeks or so to see exactly how much clout Jerry Jones has. Because if there is a legal twist in the next 2 weeks, that shows you how much power and influence Jerry Jones has, even in the judicial system, being a billionaire. So we'll see.
So we bring in Will Kane.
Hello.
Hi, Will.
Hi.
I want to start with you.
Okay.
Lawyer from Texas, kind of connected. Truth teller.
Objective
Okay.
seeker of the truth.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Right.
Does this...
Will Kane's face reminds me of those faces that you see in those old Civil War photos, like those lithographed pictures from the 1860s. Those little skinny white dudes staring into the camera with the crystal blue eyes, looking like they're ready to eat raw meat.
prove that he shouldn't have fought?
No, it doesn't prove that in any way. Only if you think hindsight is 20/20, and that's a perfect way to go about things. I think you ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, was there a legitimate legal / justice type question to answer here? And I think multiple judges, federal judges across this land, felt the answer is yes. There's a question to be answered here. Was Ezekiel Elliott afforded due process under the collective bargaining agreement? Whether or not you're talking about a federal judge in Sherman, Texas, or a district court level federal judge in the Southern District of New York, or even one of the appellate judges with the 5th Circuit, the answer came back yes from multiple judges. Then you ask yourself, well, if there was a legit question, was there a reasonable likelihood that he could win? Now, here's the thing, fellas. We haven't even gotten to this day. We still have not even gotten to that question of whether or not he was afforded due process.
Look, well, Kane, with all due respect, how could a concern be due process when it's already been established that the commissioner has an almost monarchical level of control? He is a veritable monarch when it comes to handing out suspensions and discipline according to the NFL collective bargaining agreement. It is at his leisure to do whatever he likes. Now, if one can determine that the protocol that he himself set up for domestic violence disputes was not fully carried out or followed through, then one could make a point. But for all intents and purposes, from what I understand, Kia Roberts was involved in much of the investigation. She may not have been the be-all, end-all in deciding whether or not Ezekiel Elliott gets suspended, because by most accounts, according to her, she believed that there was no real case here. But as we all know, Commissioner Goodell is operating according to optics ever since he's become a slave to the feminist or feminazi movement about 3 or 4 years ago with the Ray Rice incident. So we really know what's going on here. It's not really about whether or not Ezekiel Elliott gets a fair shake. It's about if Ezekiel Elliott and his case is going to be used as a case study in social engineering.
No court has heard those arguments yet. They've only had fights about whether or not his suspension should be stayed or put on hold, pressed pause upon until those arguments are heard.
Of course, because that's Jerry Jones trying to maintain the roster of his team so that they could try to win a championship. Jerry Jones never anticipated his team being so good so quick. So the things that you co-signed and that you agree with 3 years ago, particularly pertaining to Ray Rice and things of that nature, because Ray Rice was an asset that was not part of your corporation, the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, you see from an entirely different perspective when it's affecting one of your personal assets, that being Ezekiel Elliott. Jerry Jones is a businessman. That's another thing. I have no idea why people continue to try to use this straw man argument of, well, Jerry Jones, he was all for it when it was Ray Rice, but he's not for it now. Well, what do you expect? He's a businessman. He's not a judge. It's not his job to be impartial. It is his job to show favoritism.
And he has lost all of those fights now along the way to simply set aside his suspension for a while. So was there a reasonable likelihood that he could have won that along the way? And I think the answer was yes, that he could have at least accomplished. Let's push pause. Let's suspend the punishment until we can hear the merits of the case.
Yes, but let's understand something. We all knew that Ezekiel Elliot was not going to win this case. We knew that already. If Tom Brady didn't win for Deflategate, and even though we know that there was much more empirical evidence to corroborate the notion that Tom Brady was guilty of having the knowledge that the balls were illegally deflated, below the NFL limit. Tom Brady, though, is on a much higher pedestal than Ezekiel Elliot. So it would take much less empirical data for Ezekiel Elliot to have a suspension upheld, especially for something that's really as much of a hot button issue as domestic violence is today. We are in the era of female empowerment and female veneration. So anything even approaching quote unquote disrespect of a female is going to be heavily, heavily scrutinized and penalized.
The actual arguments of the case. Now, as it turned out, they didn't push pause. As it turned out, they're going to let the suspension be enforced before we get to the actual case. And of course, that's going to, negate everything. What's the point in having the fight if you've already served the punishment? But we can only look back with perfect hindsight, 2020 hindsight, and say it wasn't worth it. Now, along the way, there is both a real question and a likelihood of winning for Zeke throughout this entire whatever 3-month ordeal it's been.
Well, you have to look at it from Ezekiel Elliott's perspective. It's not about whether it was worth it or not to the average fan or viewers. It was about whether it was worth it to fight the suspension for him, because of how he would have been perceived if he would have relented and succumbed to the commissioner's suspension from the get-go. If he would have just got on TV and said, look, I'm just going to take my suspension like a man for something that he states that he didn't do, and that they were unable to verify or validate, what would have been the consensus amongst the general population? Okay, he did beat the bitch up. All right? Everything that she said must be true because he relented so easily. So he had to fight it for his own, for his own due cause. And whether he gets 6 games at the start of the season or he gets 6 games in the middle of the season, what difference does it make? He's getting 6 games anyway. So he might as well fight it for his own name.
You're wrong. And here's why you're wrong. First of all, number one, hindsight. And, when you talk about hindsight, you're implying that people didn't say this before this went down. I've said this from day one. I talked about this conclusion. And why? Well, it wasn't just an opinion. It's from my years and years of experience covering collective bargaining. Covering collective bargaining since 1994. And here is what I have always been told. The CBA in the world of sports is the Bible.
I agree with that. I agree with what Stephen A. is saying in regards to the CBA. That's why I stated initially, we all knew that Ezekiel Elliott was going to have to serve this suspension. But he had to fight it for his own name. It didn't matter that he already knew that he was going to lose. He had to fight it for his own name because of what he was being accused of. Now, if he gets found guilty, now he can forward it over to his owner, to his lawyers, and they can continue to fight, off camera, off script, while he's serving his penalty. And then he can also consider other recourses, possibly suing her for slander or what have you. But in the meantime, he does have to fight, because it's not like he was being accused of stealing panties out of a department store like that other cowboy running back was. That is a very, very serious accusation that was levied against him.
The courts will almost always defer because they don't want to open the Pandora's box of compromising whatever's been agreed upon in a collective bargaining agreement, because then they get involved in the minutia of things that they absolutely positively don't want. It could come down to something as simplistic as courts and judges not wanting their workloads increased.
And that's very understandable, because at the end of the day, it's very comical almost watching how ESPN covers all these athletes walking in and out of courtrooms as if 90% of the cases that are going before these judges are of actual import, and they're not. Because it's Ezekiel Elliott or Greg Hardy or whoever, Pac-Man Jones, They follow these athletes in and out of court, and they try to blow it up like it's an actual case that's going to reverberate across the fabric of American culture. And it's silly. It's really more of an indication of how much the athletes are venerated and worshipped in this society.
It doesn't matter. It's what they religiously point to. And any time, even when they've excoriated one commissioner's decision after another over the years, they've always said, however, here's what it says in the collective bargaining agreement, and that's what they lean on in the end. And so when we talk about that with Ezekiel Elliot, it does, knowing that reality, it makes perfect sense to say, without the benefit of hindsight, it made perfect sense to prognosticate. Excuse me, you're wasting your time. Okay. Because you, hold on, I'll let you speak. You don't get to legislate what's in people's heart. They're going to think what they're going to think. And we remember years ago when Big Ben Roethlisberger was accused. He was never arrested. He was never indicted. Nothing ever happened. Roger Goodell slapped 6 games on him. After talking with Roethlisberger, he reduced it to 4 games. But that was that. There was no...
Yeah, hold on, Stephen A., like Will Kane said. First off, with Ben Roethlisberger, just the fact that Roger Goodell gave him 6 games after the NFL executed its own investigation should show you how serious the accusations against Roethlisberger were and how much evidence they actually found to corroborate what he was accused of. As opposed to Ezekiel Elliot, who's really, let's be honest, he's just getting 6 games because that's the new NFL protocol for domestic dispute accusations. All a man has to do is basically be accused of domestic violence, and he's going to get 6 games. That's really where we're at right now. But for that to happen to Roethlisberger back then, when the standard was 2 games, and for him to get 6 games, what was it that the NFL found that was so damning towards Ben Roethlisberger that they were going to give him 6 games, and then when they spoke to him, it got cut down to 4. The only reason why it got cut down to 4 is because the Rooneys are a blue blood NFL ownership family. As I've stated in a video a long time ago, they made their bones as members of the Irish Mafia. You know, as many of these old time NFL owners did, they were associated with the mob. You know, the Bartolos, who used to own the 49ers, they were also associated with the mob. Sam Giancana and those guys. But, that's neither here nor there. That's another video for another day. But, the Rooneys, they were able to negotiate and speak with Roger Goodell most likely and get it down to 4 games. Ben Roethlisberger, by the way, is a Luciferian. That's neither here nor there. Allegedly, he's a Luciferian. But, that also is another video for another day. And he was raping them broads. And they had to redo his image by marrying him away to a MK Ultra sex kitten, so that, they could kind of put a little blanket, a little damper on what was emerging about him and his nature and his character, or lack thereof. Okay? So there's a major difference between Ben Roethlisberger and what went on with him and what's going on with Ezekiel Elliot. Even though Ezekiel Elliot also has to be watched, because he's a guy who seems to have a serious issue with self-control.
Absolutely nothing that happened from a law enforcement perspective against Big Ben Roethlisberger, but the league said, we're the league, we have this power, this is why we're punishing you, deal with it, Max, and he had to deal with it.
Max, if I may, quickly, let me just say this. Stephen A., I know you've been saying that. I will give you full credit for saying that from months back. But do you know who else who's been saying that? Me. I said he would eventually lose this case. But the reason that you, for example, would lose this debate with me is because that's not the question to be answered. Would he eventually lose this case because, as you just said, the CBA is the Bible? Yes, I think so. Although there are lawyers that disagree, yes, I think so. But the real question was, could he get the suspension paused for 2017 until that actual question, that actual case that you're talking about, Stephen A., that I think he would lose, that you think he would lose, was heard. That became a realistic victory for Zeke. A realistic victory became, let's just set this suspension aside until we get to that actual court case. He lost that yesterday. He lost that pause on the suspension. But that was a realistic win.
He would lose that. I said weeks ago he would lose that.
Yeah, look, I understand that, Stephen A., that you said that already, but Will's point is still valid. The point being is that they wanted to delay the suspension so that they would at least have an opportunity to establish that the protocol that the NFL has allegedly laid out to verify guilt or innocence of a player based on an accusation was not followed. That's his point. But we all know that he was going to lose the case, because whenever you grant a commissioner omnipotence in suspensions or any type of ruling against players, of course he's going to win.
Lose that, but
I think
go ahead.
You both missed the most important point, which is that it's not whether or not he won the fight. It's that he would fight at all.
Exactly.
That he fought. Now, understand, again, I have to say this every time this subject comes up. If he is guilty and he knows whether or not he did it, if he did it, he should shut up, take his penalty, and thank his lucky stars it's not a lot worse, because if he did it, he got off really easy. But if he didn't do it and he's professing his innocence, then he should fight it until the bitter end.
Absolutely. Why would you just kowtow? Why would you conciliate to somebody making a false accusation against you for the sake of your team when you're going to get the same suspension anyway?
Guys, I remember watching in a documentary, and I tried to find who it was. It was a great NBA center. I think it was Bill Russell, but maybe Willis Reed, but I'm pretty sure it was Bill Russell.
It was Bill Russell, Max. I know you're like, it was one of those niggers from the 60s. It was one of them. It was Bill Russell.
Who told the story on camera I saw years ago, and it never left me. I think he moved to a new neighborhood, and he passed some stoop, and there were like 5 kids sitting on the stoop, and they chased him home or bullied him and chased him home, and he went home and told his mom about it. And his mother took him back to the stoop and made him fight all 5 kids. And I remember...
Yeah, that was Bill Russell.
I remember in the doc, and just in case I'm wrong, I don't want to say I'm sure it's Bill Russell, but I'm pretty sure it was Bill Russell. I remember in the documentary, he was on camera and he said, I think I lost 3 and won 2 of them. The point was not that he would win. The point is that he would stand up for himself and fight for himself. That was what was important.
Absolutely. There's a great deal of nobility in the attempt. It's not always about the success. It's about the attempt. It's about the thought process. And not to digress, but this is why I always harp on brothers removing themselves, excising themselves from situations that are not the best for them, whether it's a relationship or a job. If the people around you are not concerned with your happiness, remove yourself. It's not even always about whether or not the place that you're going to ends up being much better. Sometimes it's just better for your own personal state of mind to move on to somewhere else where at least you have an optimistic view of what can happen. Once you know what someone or some place is about, and you know that it's not conducive to your overall best interests, your state of mind, then it's up to you to control your own life. That's really what it's about, is taking control of your own life and doing what's best for you. Because most people are not magnanimous enough to be as concerned with somebody else as they are with themselves.
That was what was important. And if Ezekiel Elliot believes his name is being sullied here because he's in some way being unfairly treated, bullied, as it were, then the most important thing is not that he wins or even gets on the football field. The most important thing is that he stands up and fights.
Agreed. Like I was saying, most people are not magnanimous enough to care about someone else as much as they care about themselves. So therefore, as a person, you have to make sure that you watch out for your own best interests. You just do, particularly being a so-called black man. You have to make sure that you protect yourself at all times, because there are a lot of traps and snares out here for brothers. There's no doubt about that. Ezekiel Elliot fell into one, being simple-minded, living with that, from what some commenters said, a prostitute in his home. Why would you share a home with a whore? Nothing but problems are going to come from that.
That's the most important thing. So I agree, Will, with your analysis here legally, but I don't think that's what's most important. And that's why I think that it doesn't prove that he shouldn't have tried his best.
Max, I just think your point is unrealistic, and to be quite honest with you, dare I say, a bit disingenuous. The fact of the matter is that we come to work, most Americans come to work every single day, and a lot of times, more often than not, we have legitimate fights. We have legitimate fights that we could have with the powers that be. But certain things just ain't worth it.
Well, Stephen, we know what you're talking about, and we know the reason why you're so against Ezekiel Elliot trying to fight against what he was accused of. Because we know during the Ray Rice incident, you came out and said correctly that women should not try to provoke domestic disputes if they don't want to get into domestic violence situations. I'll never forget when you said that. Your co-host at the time, your moderator at the time, Carrie Champion, looked at you like you had three heads. And it was very obvious that she went back to the bosses and she complained. And not only did she complain, but the resident 40-year-old, I shouldn't say the resident, because most of them are 40-year-old cokehead whores. The resident Caucasian West Coast cokehead whore, allegedly, Michelle Beadle, complained on the internet that you should be removed or you should be suspended or you should be reprimanded. And that is exactly what occurred. And you did not fight against it because you understand your place on the totem pole, on the liberal totem pole, is at the very bottom. You know that, and I know that, Stephen A. So that's what you're trying to enforce in Ezekiel Elliot. That scary ass mentality of just take your punishment like a man from master and be happy that he's paying you a good check. This is why I call Stephen A. Smith a boule negro. The job of the boule negro is to make sure that, that the other so-called blacks stay in line. Mentally. That is a person like Stephen A. Smith's job. When you start to evaluate many of these affluent pro-blacks, whether they be boule or liberal or what have you, you pretty much can discern and decipher exactly what their motivations are because they have to fit into a role and into a script. You understand? So Stephen A. is never going to advise Ezekiel Elliot to do something that he did not have the gumption to do, which is to fight against a reprimand that really was not justified. All he did was speak the truth, but we live in a society today where we have to be more concerned with optics and how things look than the actual reality. The actual reality is, yes, many women do precipitate domestic disputes by putting their hands on men, by being overly disrespectful verbally to a man. And a man is a human being. He's not a toilet. You just can't speak to the average man however you want. There can be repercussions. The same way that a man knows there's certain things that he can say to another man that's going to lead to a physical altercation. A woman has to understand the same things. Now, of course, it's up to a man to understand the results, the end game of a woman who's trying to provoke him and try to remove himself from that situation. But certain men are not going to do that. Certain men don't operate according to rationale. Certain men operate according to the whims of their own mind, and you put your life on the line when you engage with a man like that. So, I mean, it is what it is.
And everything is not worth it. Everything is not worth fighting. If you're Ezekiel Elliot,
I agree with that. Everything's not worth fighting for, but when you're accused of something that's as serious as domestic violence, yeah, you have to fight against that.
It's one thing to say that this man should stand up and emphatically proclaim his innocence. I completely agree with that. But when you have a protracted fight that spans months upon months at a time, where your name is left in the headlines associated with domestic violence, and there is absolutely positively nothing that you can do about that. There is nothing that you can do to change that reality. Even though I disagree with Will, I understand Will's point more if you're saying to delay the suspension is the goal. Right. But I disagree with you, but it's still valid. Whereas in the case of Matt, you're saying, no, we just need to see you fighting on behalf of yourself. And I'm saying, fighting what? There's nothing that he can do to change what he really wants to change.
Now, you see how hypocritical Stephen A. Smith is. Please keep in mind that when Tom Brady was first accused of the Deflategate issue, and Tom Brady was not strident or verbose in his protests against what he was accused of, Stephen A. Smith said, well, if that was me, if I was accused of that, I would be screaming on top of the mountains and I'd be saying there's no way that I'd be doing blah, 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 blah. And when Peyton Manning was accused of using the performance-enhancing drugs, having performance-enhancing drugs delivered to his house, and he got on TV and he put on that big show, Stephen A. Smith said, oh, that's good. That shows that he, that he really, really is showing that he was against what he was accused of. But now he's telling Ezekiel Elliot that he should just accept the fine. Why is that? Why is it okay that the Caucasian man puts up a fight against what he's accused of, but the so-called black man shouldn't? Maybe it's because subconsciously Stephen A. Smith believes that the so-called black man should be much more submissive, be much more willing and ready to kowtow to the authority of Caucasian jurisprudence. Who knows? But I just noticed that distinction, and it's very, very, very revelatory to me. And once again, let me also say this. Ezekiel Elliot had nothing to lose by fighting. He's going to get 6 games anyway. It's just a matter of when the 6 games are enacted. So he literally had nothing to lose by fighting. It's like if you're getting jumped by 6 dudes, you can either curl up in a ball in a fetal position and get stomped out, or you can try to fight. Either way, you're probably going to lose, but at least you have a chance. At least you show your manhood.
Nothing that Ezekiel Elliot can do. There is nothing he can do.
Well, there's never nothing. There's never nothing, but I think...
I agree with Max. Nothing is impossible. There's never nothing.
It is nothing.
I think it's two ways. I think...
You see Stephen A. Smith's fatalist mentality when it comes to the so-called black man protesting Caucasian authority. But once again, he was ready to create a distinction between how Tom Brady disagreed and how Peyton Manning disagreed to what they were accused of. Right? When Tom Brady continued to fight, Stephen A. Smith agreed with him when Tom Brady decided that he was going to show a backbone and start the fight against what he was accused of. But with Ezekiel Elliott, just take your penalty like a man.
I actually am on your side, Max, on the whole. If you're innocent, you fight to your last breath.
So am I, but not this.
Yeah, then you get to...
Well, Stephen A., either you fight to your last breath or you don't. All right, bro? You can't say that you're with it, but not with this. It would be one thing if they told Ezekiel Elliott, we're going to give you 6 games, and if you try to fight it, we're going to give you 10 games. Then that's a whole different story. Then you have to really judge and to balance the possibility of being able to controvert or counteract the proceedings that were rendered, according to their findings, according to the penalty that was dispensed by Goodell. But seeing as the penalty was not going to change no matter what he did, he had nothing to lose by fighting it.
Get to the point at some point where you have a risk reward analysis and you say, am I likely to win this fight? And if I'm not likely, what's the cost of fighting a certain loss, right? If I'm doing something that I'm certain to lose, there are other costs involved in that. And
Well, what are the costs here, do you
well,
think?
Stephen A. has laid it out, I think, on several occasions. One of the costs is prolonging the amount of time your name is connected to domestic violence.
But in fact, I want to address that quickly, and then I'll just let you can go on. But in fact, what's happened is we have lamented, if anything, publicly, the idea that we're not talking about domestic violence, we're talking about the battle itself, the legal process. So I don't think that I thought it was a reasonable argument to make at the time, but in retrospect, and even just now that we're in the process of it, I don't think it is quite played out that way, in fact.
I will say this, guys. I mean,
And beyond that, just to add on to what Max said, and I can't reiterate this enough, there can be no risk-reward factor when there was no additional penalty that was stipulated if he was to contest the ruling. Either way, he's getting 6 games, so he literally has nothing to lose by contesting it, other than the possibility of him being suspended during playoff games, or him being suspended during late season games that in people's minds matter more, even though every game matters equally.
I mean, Ryan Smith, our legal analyst who's on Outside the Lines and other programs, has said, you want to know the real bad thing? This isn't over. Like, there's the actual case to go to, which comes on December 1st. But this goes back to the risk reward. He will have served 4 games of the suspension. He will not likely win it. Stephen A., you don't think so? I don't think so. The fight is over, for all intents and purposes. The only fight left is Jerry Jones versus Arthur Blank in the NFL.
And to me, that's the major fight that Jerry Jones has to wage. Jerry Jones has to pull Ezekiel Elliott aside and say, look, son, you've already done what you can do. From here, I want you to take the 6-game suspension. All right, if I'm Jerry Jones, this is what I'm telling Ezekiel. I want you to take the 6-game suspension, and I'm going to come on and engage in the fight for you in the media while you maintain and you make sure that you maintain your body and your health and your conditioning for when you come back. There's no need for you to speak to the press about this issue anymore. I'm going to attack and address Roger Goodell. I'm also going to attack and address the owners that come against me, and we're systematically going to try to restore some of the esteem that you may have lost in the media. And that's how you handle the situation. Not by Ezekiel Elliott continuing to fragment his mind worrying about, court cases and football and all this other nonsense. You have to be focused on what you can actually, actionize and what you actually can deal with. You can't be worried about judicial processes.
I want to point this out quick because I know we got to go. I just want to thank the both of you, Will and you, Max, because I disagree with you. And I'm literally coming from the perspective of a young African-American male finding his name in the news over this issue.
Yeah, you see that? Like I stated, when it comes to a so-called black man, Stephen A. does not want the black man to fight any form of ruling or judgment that is rendered against him, even when it is unfair. But when it is a Caucasian man, he wants them to fight and he wants them to show some spunk.
We might disagree on the points, but I respect both points that y'all are bringing up. And I think it's important that everybody hears what your points are, because I think it's important to understand we're looking at it from three different prisms, if I may say so. And I just wanted to thank y'all for that.
Yeah, you're looking at it from the scared Negro prism, or through the scared Negro prism, I should say.
Because I'm looking at it from a completely different prism than both of y'all, but I'm not dismissing what y'all are saying. I truly am not.
I hear you.
Max, you brought up
Yeah, this was a very good discussion. All three of them made relatively valid points.
a very interesting point. Maybe his name isn't really connected to domestic violence at this point. It's more so connected to the NFL versus the NFLPA. As of right now, as far as football, the soonest he could get on the field is Week 16. That would be against Seattle, who just lost Richard Sherman for the year. Will, good to see you. Great job on Mike and Mike this morning.
Thank you.
Yes. So we'll see what happens with the Ezekiel Elliot case. I do believe that despite what they're saying, that his name is still associated with quote-unquote domestic violence, but it's really associated with the feminazi avalanche that started out as a snowball, and Ezekiel Elliot is just a victim of that fascist movement that is really moving against the NFL. The NFL has a series of, is fighting a multitude of battles on numerous fronts. They're fighting against the woke liberal Negroes. They're fighting against the feminists. And this is why I always addressed a lot of the quote unquote liberal tactics. The NFL is X marks the spot in regards to a lot of social engineering. But anyway, peace.